Let's remove the wheel, 19mm socket, remove all 5 of your lug nuts. With this last one, the hubcap's going to want to come off, so take that off, of course, if you have steel wheels and if you have the hubcap. If not, don't worry about it. And remove the wheel. Sometimes they're stuck on like this, and if tapping them doesn't work, I'm going to grab a rubber mallet and hit it from the backside. But before I do that, I want to put on a lug nut for safety. That way the tire and wheel don't go flying off when I hit it. There we go. Remove your safety lug nut and remove the wheel. Before we start, I'm going to stick a pry bar in this slot on the caliper and just try to compress the piston in a little bit. This will make it move and make it easier to take it off. Next, remove these 2 14mm bolts that hold the caliper onto the bracket. These are actually your slider pins as well. Remove them. And remember that the top one has this rubber piece on it, the bottom one does not. Now take your caliper, set it aside. I like to put it on top of the strut here. Take your pads off. This one's stuck a little bit. There we go. With an 18mm socket, remove these 2 bolts that hold your caliper bracket onto the knuckle. Leave this one in a few threads and then take off the top one. Take both of these out. And now take your rotor off. If for some reason yours is stuck on there, you can just use a hammer and hammer it off. Next, I'm going to clean up this hub surface. Make sure that this outer ridge as well as this inner one is nice and clean. You don't want any of this rust on here. Chunks like this will make the rotor not sit flush, and then you'll get braking vibrations, pulsations, and then eventually it'll warp the rotors and they will wear prematurely. So make sure everything is nice and clean. And right in between the studs and the center bore here, I'm just going to use my wire brush, make it as clean as I can. Use brake parts cleaner, clean this all up. And then apply a thin coat of anti-seize to the hub, especially these 2 areas, so that the rotor doesn't seize on here and it can prevent rust from building up in the future. Try to avoid getting it on the lug studs as much as possible though. So here we have the caliper bracket that we have to disassemble. So take the anti-rattle clips out, and then you can either use a wire brush or a sanding disc to clean this up. For me, it's actually a lot rustier than this should be, so I'm going to clean the general area with a wire brush, but I'm going to actually use a sanding disc and get in here and actually dig all of this rot out, because this cannot be here. The pads will actually get squeezed in here between the 2 ends and you will have braking issues. So go ahead and clean this out. Next, you want to put a thin coating of grease on this area where the anti-rattle clips sit. That'll prevent rust from building up in the future, hopefully. And you don't want a lot, otherwise it'll squeeze out and go in the middle right here where the rotor is, and that's obviously not good. And then take your new anti-rattle clips, press them in all the way. And now, to take care of these 2 bores, I still have good grease in there, so I'm not going to worry about cleaning them up. If you had rust in there, you'd want to take these boots out and then clean inside with a bore brush. I'm just going to add some fresh grease, and I'm going to put it inside of the boot because I can't put it on the pin. It'll get wiped off as I try to put the pin in. So do this to both sides. Work it into the little accordion looking part. Okay, this bracket is now ready for reinstallation. Now let's put the rotor on I have the performance drilled and slotted rotors. If you have the flat rotors that are not drilled and slotted, you would want to use brake parts cleaner and a rag and wipe off both the front and the back side of the braking surface. That's very important because they will be coated with an oil coating from the factory so they don't rust on the shelves. These are not coated with oil. They have a different special coating, but if you have the flat ones, definitely wipe them off. You don't want oils on your brake pads. Next, take your caliper bracket, slide it over the rotor, start in the 2 mounting bolts. Let's snug them up and then torque them to 80 foot-pounds. Now as for the pads, the inner pad will have a wear indicator that's going to sit on the bottom here. So if this is the inner pad, this is your wear indicator that you have to put on. The way to do it is has a little clip, and the pad is notched out right here. So you can basically just clip it on, press it firmly until it positions itself into place and locks in. Now you want to take your pad, slide it onto the caliper bracket, make sure it slides smoothly. If it doesn't, then it means you didn't clean up the bracket enough. You'll have braking issues. Do the same to the outer pad, except this one does not get a wear indicator. Press both of them on. Next, you want to take your caliper, and we have to push this piston in. That way we can make room for the new pads. I have my caliper depression tool here. There are multiple types of tools that do this. You can even use large pliers or C-clamp or something. But basically, the idea is to push this piston back in. Of course, first you want to make sure that there's no large debris around the dust boot here, which there isn't for me. And you want to go slow and completely push this piston back. That way, again, like I said, you have to make room for the new pads. All right, so this is pushed all the way back as far as it'll go. So next I want to add a little bit of grease to the outside ring of this piston here. This is going to help the brakes operate quietly and smoothly. And I'm going to do the same to these 2 ears over here, which I know you can't see, but just add a thin layer for the same reason that we put it on here. Now you want to take your caliper, slide it over the pads, and make sure that it goes over these 2 boots and it lines up. Now you want to take your slider pins, which I actually cleaned up in the wire wheel because there was rust in these 2 ridges here. These 2 ridges are what seals up the slider pin up against the boot, and you don't want any water getting in here, otherwise it'll create rust. So make sure that these areas are nice and clean, and let's lubricate them. Now, although you can't put a lot of grease on this because it'll just get wiped off as you try to insert it, you can and should put a thin layer, especially right up here on this ridge where it seals up. And of course you want to do this to both, but remember the top one was the one that had this rubber bushing in here. Slide in the top one and slide in the bottom one. Let's bottom these out. Torque these to 32 foot-pounds. And there you go. At this point you want to do the same to the other side. Pump up your brakes, check your master cylinder, get the wheel back on. And if you have hubcaps, go ahead and put them on now because the lug nuts are what hold the hubcaps in. And you have this little cutout here that has to line up with your valve stem. So line that up. Automatically your lug nuts will line up with the holes in the hubcaps. Put on all 5 of your lug nuts, snug them up, and torque them to 100 foot-pounds.